And I remember all the men in my family saying that when I grew up, that my father and my brother were going to have to be standing at the door with baseball bats. And I did not understand why. And I was born a peace-loving soul and also witnessed domestic violence and did not want to be the cause of any more violence. And when I asked what this was about, it was just, oh, you'll understand when you grow up. And honestly, I've been working 8 years now on a memoir because I still don't understand, and I want to.
Expanding possibilities, the mindset zone.
I'm your host, Anna Melikian, and before we start with today's show, please remember to visit mindset.zone. Yes, instead of .com, it's .zone. There you can find all the episodes and other amazing resources, all at mindset.zone. Clementina Esposito, writing coach and founder of the Clementina Collective, where no one writes alone, everyone recognizes the power of a well-told story, and ugly truths become beautiful in the end. I know Clementina for more than 10 years now and always admire her craft with the writing. And one of her parallel missions that is tell beautiful stories about women and about women's stories. So this week, that is the International Women's Day on the March 8th, I decided to invite her for the Mindset Zone podcast to speak about woman mindset development, how we create lenses that we see the world as women and even other people, their own bias and own mindsets around being a woman. So welcome, Clementina.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you for having me. I feel more magical already. Your podcast voice is just beautiful.
Thank you. And we speak on and off during the years about this subject. And I remember that the day you were helping me writing a piece about for this week for social media. And I was telling my own perspective, my own story, and I was commenting that until maybe 6, 7, I didn't saw any difference between boys and girls. For me, I had my brother 2 years older than me. We were just the two of us. And I was a tomboy. So short hair, always with pants and playing football with him, and whatever he will play, I will tag along. And my mom and parents were no problem about that. It was just easy for them. And only when I start to go out into the world, I realized, oh, people see different these things of boys and girls. And I start to see that there was a bias, and I had to do things in a different way that my brother didn't, and I didn't like that at all. So I really fight to why, if he can do that, why can I not do that? I absolutely remember. And I think that was helped me from the beginning in terms of my mindset. I always saw myself first as a person, as an individual that happened to be a girl, a woman after. So, and I think I carry that even today. And I think it's a great way of being in the world, but I absolutely recognize the bias and how the system is tilted against opportunities for women. And even, how do you say, I still remember in college when I went to study, I'm originally from Portugal, and I went to study abroad in England. And I was by myself there, and my parents were okay with it, but was the responsibility that I had to keep myself safe. And even I still remember once that I was in another city, we had gone to some training there or some stuff there. And then I was walking alone to the train station, and I put my backpack in front of me, pretending that I was pregnant. Because my thing, okay, if somebody sees a pregnant woman, they are not going to attack the pregnant woman. But that kind of thought, a man doesn't have to worry about that.
No.
They will have other worries, but that is not the topic of our conversation today. So I would love to know your own perspective. And I know that this is a topic that you have given a lot of thought during the years. So I would love to hear your own upbringing, a little bit how it molded or develop your own mindset about this. And you've been doing a lot of work about these topics. So I thought it will be interesting to hear you speak about this.
I did take a deep breath first, because as I was listening to you talk, there's so many ways, right, when we're called upon to sort of represent a perspective about women's ways of being or things that shaped us early, biases, those kinds of things, and already I have voices of dissent in my head, right? Like, and I think it's important what you just said, parceling out, yes, men have other worries, but that isn't the topic of this podcast. And already I'm thinking, wow, where we're starting from is this idea of, almost like what you've said is almost like, at first people were asked to be colorblind, right? And then they're like, no, we can't be colorblind, right? So there's always in a way, there's a parallel to what you're saying. You're almost saying, I was brought up in a house where I was raised to be gender blind.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, of course, I could talk about improvements we could make on that. But also, in terms of when we talk about mindset, I think the most important thing is to always recognize there's another way of looking at things and to sort of turn them all over in our head. And coming from the kind of background where I came from, which was the opposite, there was a very strict delineation from the outset between boys and girls. In my family, I've been surrounded by men and boys my whole life, and I came from this large family. Except I had one girl cousin. All the rest of them were boys. And being in an Italian American family, the men sort of ruled the roost, and the women served them in ways that, and from a very young age, I wasn't allowed to do what the boys did. I wasn't allowed to speak the way the boys spoke, and I was expected to do chores and stay behind while they went out to play. So on a typical Sunday afternoon when we all got together, I looked around going, what? Because, the women did the cooking, they did the cleaning up, they did the setting the table, they did the clearing the table. And you could find the men snoozing on the couch, literally like eat, take a nap, and the boys all outside playing, being able to be wild. As we grew up in the teenage years, you talk about the 70s. We lived right outside New York City. And, my cousins, I can remember sitting on the stoop watching one of my cousins in particular walk down the street, he looked like he came right out of Saturday Night Fever, powered by his genitals, his button down shirt sort of like open, his hairy chest out, the gold chains, just like, you could practically hear, I can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a ladies fan, they were encouraged to go out to be, players essentially, and any evidence of my growing up was sort of prohibited. My father was very strict about what I wore, what I wasn't allowed to wear, that I couldn't wear big earrings, I couldn't wear makeup, couldn't shave your legs, couldn't, it was what could you do? You couldn't do anything. And I remember one time a girlfriend and I went to the mall and stopped at the Estee Lauder counter and was just playing with makeup. And, on the way home, I tried to wipe most of it off, but failed to do so effectively. And when I got home, there was, hell to pay.
Wow. And this is interesting because what you are describing, I think, is quite typical of our generation, is the reward, the masculinity is reward. When in that growing up years, it's like, oh, do more of it, and the feminine side is repress.
Yes.
You have to control it. You have to keep it under wrap. You have to you have to put it under.
Right. And also, that creates a certain kind of shame around, what's inevitable. And, it begins, I definitely had the feeling of like, what's wrong with me? Why do I have to hide?
And the contradiction, because then there is also the message, be ladylike.
Yes. And that was another problem. And my personality, I was initially sort of outspoken, precocious, and I would, my family said, which is very interesting, the choice of words, quote, come out with things that were a little on the shocking side. And it was very confusing because they would often be taken off guard and laugh or, couldn't hide their like, oh my gosh, where did she get that? Where did she learn it? And how did she learn to use it so accurately? But then I was always punished. And again, told not to speak, not to say that, to be careful. To be more ladylike, absolutely. And this fear that I was going to get in trouble. And perhaps most disturbing, that I would incite violence. And that I didn't understand. And I remember all the men in my family saying that when I grew up, that my father and my brother were going to have to be standing at the door with baseball bats. And I did not understand why. And I was born a peace-loving soul and also witnessed domestic violence and did not want to be the cause of any more violence. And when I asked what this was about, it was just, oh, you'll understand when you grow up. And honestly, I've been working 8 years now on a memoir because I still don't understand and I want to.
And it's interesting that the way that you articulate this so beautifully makes me think on the double bind that the situation is of the different contradictory messages. Almost there is not a win. It's like, what is that expression? You are lost because you don't have a dog, but if you have a dog, you are also not. There is no scenario that is okay. If you express your femininity, it's a problem. If you don't express your femininity, it's a problem. So it's like, what shall I be? What shall I do?
Being a woman is the problem.
Yeah, but but this double bind kind of scenario the way that you were describing really reminds me when I was studying psychology and psychotherapy, when we are studying some of the theories behind schizophrenia. There is a lot of double bind communication patterns there.
Fascinating.
That you are not safe and there is no way of being safe. You are shamed, you are in trouble, but you are demanded to. Is a lot of contradictions in the communication patterns. Mm-hmm. It's tough for a kid growing up in that kind of communication because it's not clear, it's very confusing.
Yeah, and I think, part of why I brought out the whole, when we think about the ways that our creativity and our sexuality are linked, it makes it even tougher, that to repress at such formative ages. And still, oh my gosh, I think I was 33 at my grandmother's 90th birthday party. 33 years old, and I had chosen a very tasteful pantsuit to go to her party, sort of Asian-inspired kimono top that had a plunging neckline, And I remember walking into the restaurant with my husband, and from across the restaurant, my father signals to me that something about my blouse, and runs over to the bartender and manages to find a safety pin. And mind you, those of you who can't see me on this podcast, I'm not big breasted. There was certainly nothing. It was a low V on a flat neckline. Like, there was nothing distasteful about it. And he manages to get a safety pin and come over to me and tell me that I must put the safety pin in my blouse. I'm just like, when does it end? And the idea that, you don't know that even at the age of 33, I didn't know how to dress myself
And that reminds me of one of the pieces that you wrote, I was before the interview looking at, because I remember when I read it was in 2015, do you believe it already, 2015, that you wrote this open letter to Mrs. Wagner with the hashtag, I look like an engineer. Because this was a campaign that I don't know which company, but the company was doing. And there was this beautiful woman. My team is great. Everyone is smart, creative, and hilarious. And she's a platform engineer there. And people didn't believe that was a real person.
Yeah, they didn't believe that she could simultaneously be so, attractive and also be an engineer. Yeah. And that really stirs you up, and I think it's the contradiction, the ridiculousness of it, the way that we can't control, and then I think lots of people do things to control. I've struggled with my weight a good part of my life, and I've sussed out many of the part of my, people ask me now, what do I do to stay fit? Well, part of it, largely, it's been the psychological work that I've done, right? I quickly realized that, I was dangerous from the messaging that I got growing up. And so I also quickly realized that the men in my family were prejudiced toward fat people. So I had a weight problem. And that, worked sometimes. It would repel a certain kind of man. But it largely doesn't work, and then, in academia, again, I dressed like a librarian. I mean, a lot of people who know me now know I love bright colors. I love fashion. But I denied myself all of that to try to stay safe.
And look professional. I remember when I was teaching in university, in a private university in Portugal and in Spain, is the pantsuits that make me look professional and denying the femininity. Maybe I will have a little heels in my boots, but the rest was...
But they were smart heels. They were definitely smart heels, yes. I'm sure.
Yeah, and thick and solid, and is a lot that all these contradictions that putting us in boxes, and then we're trying to coming out of boxes. And I think the conversation, at least now we can speak much more about this. And I think the Me Too movement allow a lot of conversations that were already happening come out in the open for everybody to, hopefully, everybody to listen. And I will wish that everybody will feel that we can discuss, because maybe there was a little bit of I think everybody should be able to speak about this and to learn from each other's experiences. Let me put in a different way. You spoke in the beginning that I think is an interesting parallel, color blindness, and then we have to recognize that the world was not really so colorblind, so let's speak explicit about it. And with gender is many way. There was so many advances in the 20th century about equality, absolutely. So there was no men and women are equal until, it's not really. And we have to create a place that we can speak about this.
We have so much more work to do. And I think, Anna, the wonderful thing about where we've begun here is just to bring the attention on the idea that really so much, I long for the day, when I feel like I'm still not able to fully relax into my femininity. And I look forward to that. I haven't given up, that I am on my way there, and I should say relax into the fullest expression, the fullest celebration of my femininity, because, so many amazing things have also happened to me because I'm a woman, birthing my two children and mothering them and being. And that isn't to say that these constructs of, being a woman and being a man in the world, right? We all have a range inside of us. And I think we have so much learning to do. And sadly, there have been some, I had so much hope in the days of the Me Too movement when it happened. And since then, I've been really honestly disappointed in some of the things that have happened. And I hope we can get to a place really where people who don't think they need to learn are willing to learn. Because it's just been largely the way society is constructed that I think women, to get along, to get what we've wanted to in our careers or even move toward it, we've had to do a lot of empathizing and a lot of understanding of men in ways that they just haven't had to. And I wish they would understand. I certainly don't fault them for that. I think it takes a very nuanced kind of learning to really understand the difference between, for example, fun flirting and continuing to put a hurting on people. And, unfortunately, we have a lot of men who are feeling so many things, and not to generalize. But when I look back on my family and I think about the constructs that I grew up in, they certainly had a lot to lose with women's liberation, but those losses are superficial compared to what men have to gain when they're in the presence of fully expressed, healed women, and I don't think we can do it without them.
This is what I think sometimes is missing in the communication out there when we speak about these issues, is the nuance. It's always easy for us as human beings to think things is the binary kind of code, 1 or 0, yes or no, and black and white, and we forget all the beautiful nuances that there are in between these things, and be able to speak about it in a frank way or because I think I have a friend that she's Black, and she has done some work in the diversity and inclusion world, and she has this thing: no shame, no blame. But let's speak. We are not here to, there has been enough shame in this and enough blame in so many ways. That doesn't mean it's not taking responsibility. I see that as like there is a nuance for me there. No blaming doesn't mean that there is not responsibilities and consequences of act. But for the communication, to open the communication, we have to be able to speak about all the colors of the rainbow, all the nuances in between.
And, the tricky part about that is, we could do a whole nother interview on that, right? The shame and the blame, there's so much shame inside of most of us, right? And it's buried so deep that, it's hard. It can be really hard to have these conversations without it coming up in one way or another, and it can be really, really, really hard, especially when, and I think this happens to a lot of quote, and I this really bugs me, the good men, bad men joke. Oh, gosh.
Again, the dichotomy.
Right? Let me go on record saying this. I love every man who's ever hurt me, right? In spite of having been hurt. And it's not about good men and bad men. And it can be really hard, though, for us. So to use the parlance that's out there, a lot of men who have done considerable work, not to be like their fathers, to be better men, to be allies of women in whatever capacity they have. They create an identity around being, quote, good. And that can be a liability and an impasse to learning, because I won't rest until I have taken this work as far as I can in my lifetime. But I have compassion and sympathy, because I think it can be really hard when you create an identity around something and then someone says, well, you have more learning to do. Or here's how, you still exist on this spectrum,
And that is the growth mindset, in my opinion, believing that we are always learning and we always can improve. Because even as women, we carry stereotypes and bias that work against that we are not aware of. And if we are open to learn and, I didn't realize that, give us an opportunity to do something different.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. But I think it's hard. It's hard work. There's certainly lots and lots and lots of responsibility to go around, and lots of really, really hard work to do. And when we look at, the larger message of my opus is, that these kinds of attitudes and these kinds of things, they start at home, and we develop patterns. When, you're a little girl and your father is the patriarchy for all intents and purposes, and you love and adore him and you want to please him, you develop patterns that are hard, very, very hard to break, and very heartbreaking to break. And not everybody is willing to do that work, but until we really stand for ourselves, and for what is real, unconditional love, all the other changes will be very hard pressed to stick.
And how can we keep open to learning? I'm aware of the limited time that we have today, and I want to finish with something, at least a direction or an attitude or a book, or how can we keep nurturing our learning about these issues and our openness to keep learning?
To just not assume that we know anything, right? I think curiosity is the most amazing thing we can keep having, not to assume that we know, or that this is an old story. Just to keep getting curious about what people need, from us. I think people also don't realize that Me Too was a moment when I could, this may sound a little bit crazy, but I could tell by, because I'm a writing coach, people trust me with their stories, and there's a way in which you can tell a story that's been worked over and worked through from a raw story. And one of the most surprising things that happened to me in those days where, I feel like the internet was flooded with women's stories was I could tell that some of them were coming out for the first time, in this raw, and it was incredible. It was just incredible to me, and sad, and also, good, and whatever, when these things when it's time for them to come out, even if they happened so long ago, I think it's really important for people to understand that there are stages of healing, and there are things that people have to go through to get to it. And there's, it's like any of the stages of grief. I think it was a moment when women started to reckon with the still unmeasurable effect. How do we measure that loss? men are feeling like women are angry, and women are feeling like men are angry, and everybody's angry, and everybody, and then the other people are crying. And when is she going to get over her stuff? It happened a million years ago. And why is it coming out now? And just a little more patience, a little more compassion, a little more realizing that for some of these women, no one has ever witnessed the truth of their story. And that is so powerful to stand witness and to not judge whatever feeling she's having, whatever grieving she's doing, whatever toll it's taken. Then, to be patient with each other. It's big work. It's big work.
I love this, is the curiosity, the openness, and patience, because this is not something that can be solved. Check the box. Let's go to the next thing. No, it's much more complex.
No, it's got to be sat with, and it's got to be sat with. And, one of the hardest things to do, I think, is to admit, when we want to be one way and we have a self-perception of ourselves and to admit, you know what, I have probably unwittingly contributed. And instead of condemning myself or being so defensive that I can't look, let me look, and let me keep looking, and let me leave no stone unturned, or no avenue to explore where I can examine, for example, my sense of entitlement or the ways that I have assumed.
Yeah, and take it, and that is the personal development, is taking the opportunity to keep learning, taking the opportunity to keep evolving.
Yeah, and to say, this doesn't make me, I think the quick go-to is, oh my gosh, this must make me a bad person. And actually, no, this medicine will make you a better person. If we must use good and bad, it will make you a good person. It will make you a better person.
Yeah, and this is, it's not that we finish developing. This is a journey, and and that is one of the things that I love about the work of Carol Dweck, about the fix and the growth mindset, because give us a language, a binary language, that allow us at least to open. Okay, and what I love about is that we have so many mindsets about so many different things, but the recognition, maybe around this I have a fixed mindset. I thought that I have done all the work and I was complete. And if I realize, no, maybe there are so much more that I can learn, and we move that to the growth mindset, that the shift allow us to be more open, allow us to be more curious, and I think allow us to speak about these things in a more open way.
Yeah, and to really listen to each other.
And see each other. So we absolutely go on and on, but time does not allow at this moment. So hopefully this was like a seed that we plant, and hopefully will allow people to be more open, be more curious, and listen.
And be more patient.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here today.
Expanding possibilities, the mindset zone.
Thank you for listening, and remember to visit mindset.zone. Yes, instead of .com, it's .zone. There you can find all the episodes and other amazing resources, all at mindset.zone. As always, I'm so grateful you are here. Expand what's possible for you, for the ones around you, for the world.